I haven't heard from any of you about this a warning window this semester, so your computer must be set to the same way as to my computer too. Say I have this file. This is the printing file that is a testing version. When I try to open this file, I come up with this embedded mismatch, profile mismatch warning. Have you seen this semester? Once?
Typography forms.
Okay, you did. Okay, but not for the image too. No. You should see this so that you can see if your file that about to be opened has a embedded profile, or maybe it doesn't have any embedded profile, that kind of things. If you see this, and then you're gonna see this from now on because I would like you to go in and set up your computer too. If you see this profile mismatch, and if the embedded profile that is the profile that comes from your file is different from working profile, you always want to honor the embedded profile, saying use the embedded profile instead of working space. So you don't want to convert it. You don't want to convert it, or you don't want to discard the embedded profile. This is the last thing you like to do, by the way. That's the worst thing happens to you, by the way. And I'll show you what I mean. So when you have a color profile that is different from your working space, honor the embedded profile and work with it. So you open the file. And then if you like to change it, you can change it for a different purposes, but you always want to honor what it comes with it. Maybe your client or whoever that you've sends the file to you maybe had a intention for the output or something like that. So you always want to honor it. Okay, so these settings are found in Edit and Color Settings. If you go to Color Settings, there are a lot of things hidden behind it. But I would like you to look into one thing here. Pay attention to color management policies. This is important. And under color management policies, make sure that if you have a profile mismatch, you be asked. Even if you have a missing profile, you can say you being asked. And when you are pasting from one file to another, this isn't so critical, by the way, but you being asked. And then see if destination space versus the origin of the file color space matches or not matching. But make sure it always honor the original color space. Yeah, to get there, and then I'm going to say okay. To get there, you go to Edit from the top menu, and you go to Color Settings, and the Color Settings opens this settings. There is a predefined color space that is mostly used for, say, North America prepress, or if you're doing the web development, then web, North America web, and then internet, newspaper, general purposes. There are a lot of settings that is predefined. For example, North America prepress, that would have the working space color, Adobe RGB, all those settings under color management policies, check. So you can probably, I would like to say, safe to say that North America prepress 2 settings for the color settings is a good starting point for most of you guys. And if you mostly use the Profoto RGB instead of Adobe RGB, you can say instead of Adobe RGB as a working space, you can call it Profoto RGB so that you won't get warned every time you open the file saying that there is a mismatch. So my color space at home is Profoto RGB plus the other settings of North America prepress. If you are a European, a designer, photographer, then they're going to be using European settings. If you are in Asia, then they're going to be using the Japan settings there too. So there are 3 well-used color settings, and you can choose from it too. We are in the North America right now. And so we're going to go for North America prepress. Those prepress settings are based on the area. And then if you are a raw shooters and most of your images will come with Profoto RGB attached to it, then I go ahead and change the working color space for RGB to Profoto RGB instead of Adobe RGB. And then say OK to it. Other settings, I'm keeping them as a default settings. Now, I've noticed that say OK and closing down, restarting the Photoshop wouldn't make the differences. You have to start the computer, restart the computer to make this settings in effect. So that is something that you like to remember. Okay? I would like to talk about the worst case scenario. Say, this one, exact same picture, but this document does not have an embedded RGB profile. What do you do? At this point, it is your guessing. It's a guessing game. If you don't know how the color is supposed to look, you don't know what kind of color profile you should attach to. But if you see this, the first thing I would do is leave as is. I open the file as is first, without profile. I'll say OK. And then I would like you to notice it's the same exact image, the ones that I opened earlier and before, but you see how color gets whacked. This is just really saturated, weird color. This one is the one that doesn't have any color profile attached to it. Photoshop doesn't know how to handle the color because there is no translator in between. So that's why it's extremely important to have a translator, which is in this case Adobe RGB 1998. It can be Profoto RGB or any kind of color profile. Otherwise, color gets really weird. So if you get this kind of the file, then what you need to do is to go into assign profile instead of convert to profile, because this one doesn't have the profile assigned to it. So I'll go edit and assign profile. And changing the document profile can affect the appearance of the layers. Sure. And you assign it. But when you assign it, you like to go in here and then start changing the color appearances. What if you assign Adobe RGB? Or what if you assign sRGB? Colors start to shift. You see that, right? Or if I say Apple RGB, color match RGB, I didn't see the differences. Image P3. There are infinite possibilities at this point. And then you have to pick one that looks seemingly acceptable. But it's a guessing game. And we know that this is a Adobe RGB. It doesn't look like it's completely the same color, but it's definitely not as RGB. It looks really washed out. And if it had a Profoto RGB, it's just way too bright, then I will go for Adobe RGB, and I'll say I will attach this for now and then start working on it.
But then you can adjust it the way you want it later.
Yeah,
anyway.
right. But if your file doesn't have color profile, this can happen to your file too. So make sure that when you are given or sending your file to somebody else, if you're working in-house with your computer, you probably don't have any problems because you know how it looks like. But if your file gets to somebody else's who doesn't know how that picture is supposed to look, it's a big problem. And they'll probably guess a different colorations too, which is not a good thing. So make sure that your file has a touched color profile so that when it moves from your computer to a next door or somebody overseas, then colors are consistent. That is how the color profile is taking the role and very important. Okay?
So right before you changed brought the color profile, can you still use that picture and adjust all of those colors yourself, or you have to?
It's probably good to assign the profile so that this file knows what kind of color space the colors are encoding. If you don't define it, then you don't have any standard. So you just need to set the standard, right? And then it gets completely different too. Yeah. So make sure that your file has a color profile attached to it. Okay? So maybe something that you can do for your project files, that make sure that your project files have the color profile attached to it. If it doesn't, then you can assign profile in Photoshop. You can go assign profiles, right? You can assign profiles if you don't have anything. If you like to convert the color space from one color space to another, then you go to convert to profile and specify the destination. So if you are printing, so project 4, for the project 4, if you are working with 16-bit file, you can have most effectively Profoto RGB or possibly Adobe RGB. But if you have 16 bits, you can go for Profoto RGB to take the advantage of it too. So that is something that you can look into your files. The convert to profile, change the color space without changing the appearance of the file. But color space will be changed. If you have layers, by the way, it changed the appearance, by the way. So that's another thing. So assigning the color profile earlier on probably is a very good idea too. Questions? Let me just talk about one more thing, and let's have a work time. I would like to, yeah.
Is it going to still the same when we export as a JPEG?
Yes, when you export as a JPEG in Lightroom, it is the same thing. You go in here. When you go into when you export the image, if your file, well, if it is raw file, it doesn't have the color space attached to it. So you basically will apply the color profile to a raw file and then export it. Or if it does have the color profile already, then it will convert without changing the appearance of the color. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Heather?
Yeah, you might have already answered this, but what do you recommend then that we have it, like for instance, I just did scanning and it's saying, it popped that up saying that it's identifying the scanner colors. So what do you recommend that we typically have it at then?
So 16-bit per photo RGB is good, and 8-bit for print purpose, Adobe RGB is good, and something that goes online or purely on the monitor viewing environment, then sRGB is pretty good. But if you don't have the color profile, is that what you're asking, Heather?
Yeah, like what do you recommend that we?
If it doesn't have the color profile, actually it doesn't matter. You have to go assign profile and change it, to find the most desired, closely matching your original color ones. Because it changes as you go choose the different color space, you see, right? And I don't know if this is what you wanted, which is per photo RGB, or if this is the color that you wanted, or this is the color you wanted. You can decide if that is your file, right? But if it is somebody else's file, that's a problem, because you don't know how it's supposed to look.
On the internet one, I know that it should be sRGB.
It's
How many bits?
8-bit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that 8-bit a channel? Like 8-bit red, 8-bit
8-bit per channel
channel?
RGB. All right. Did I answer your question, Heather?